I am really excited to be part of Work Group 4 and, of course, a part of the whole AAC Consortium. So thank you all for having us today. Our group decided that we really needed to kind of delve into the categories of barriers to organic peer support. And so, as Jill so proficiently just told you about the five vessels, if you will, or pots of barriers, the first one we have is our attitudinal barriers, and Kevin Williams will be talking to us about those attitudinal barriers.
Attitudinal barriers to Hello, everyone. Attitudinal barriers to organic peer support are expressions of the struggle with confidence and investment among key stakeholders. An attitudinal barrier can be defined as a feeling individuals have towards a particular subject that limits growth or impact of the activities and projects that support it. For a project, the subject is peer support in AAC, and the individuals with feelings are the key stakeholders in this space. Key stakeholders of AAC peer support are participants, support partners, or the community resource managers. A participant's lack of investment could be from a person that's biased or past bad experiences with disability groups not being for them or their loved one. This could be a barrier to prevent them from participating with the group. For projects like the Isaac Chat, some people who use AAC shy away from participating because they feel they are not as good with their advice as others in the chat. Another reason is a person has a bad experience with participating in a disability group that they felt out of place intellectually. A communication partner's lack of investment could be from an underestimate of the ability to engage in peer relationships. I meet plenty of therapists and parents who try to compare the journey of other people who use AAC to the person they are helping and think that person wouldn't benefit from joining a group with them because they can't keep up. All know that's just a barrier in their thinking, and many groups are open to having a diverse group of users. This is associated with the community's lack of investment in providing organic peer support opportunities due to misconceptions of the cognitive abilities of AAC users. The attitude of leaders that make the decisions of funding or providing other resources is a big barrier and leads to the root of other types of barriers explained on this panel. There are many more attitudinal barriers that a person who uses AAC faces when participating with organic peer support. I just choose one from each of the key areas where people's feelings are involved. I will end this section by saying attitudinal barriers is also linked heavily to the words we use, the value we place on those words, especially when they are used as a label or a badge of honor. Tom Shakespeare, the famous disability studies professor, has an excellent talk about this on YouTube. But if we want a more concrete example specific to AAC and how impactful of how the words we use change attitudes, we can look at the documentary of Consortium member Jordyn Zimmerman. Highly recommended if you haven't yet. Also, how we as a disability community use language. We all by now know and have used person-first language, and how prideful that not only people who have a disability is when something other than person-first is used, but many colleagues and supporters of disability develop strong feelings when they come across identity-first languages used and is more appropriate at the time. which is an attitudinal barrier we all can work on. To conclude, I will end by saying attitudinal barriers can lead to the other barriers explained by my colleagues on this panel. Back to you, Kirk.
Thank you, Kevin. Very insightful. Love to talk about attitudinal barriers because we all seem to have them, whether we have them consciously or unconsciously. So thank you, Kevin. Our next barrier that we're going to be discussing would be structural barriers. And I'd like to introduce to you Michael Fondacaro, and he will be talking to us about these barriers.
Hi, I'm Michael Fondacaro. I will be exploring the structural barriers that impact AAC peer support. Structural barriers are a little different than attitudinal barriers, as they focus more on physically getting to the peer support group. The first major structural barrier is geographical location. As all of us can see, each one of us is in a different region of the United States. Now, imagine this consortium could not be done virtually. That would basically render this project useless because we would have to pick one central location to meet up and discuss AAC peer support models. I don't know about everybody else, but I would not be willing to travel hundreds of miles, multiple times a year, to meet up for a couple days. Also, we would have to take into consideration travel costs, food, accessible hotels, and the possibility that things could break during travel. Unfortunately, most AAC peer supports don't have the ability to go virtual, so geographical location is a real issue for many groups. I would like to expand on this a little further. Even if everybody was willing to travel, a lot of people have mobility issues that affect their transportation. For me, in addition to travel costs, I have to find somebody who is willing and able to drive my van. If I find someone, then I have to ask if they can stay with me the entire trip. Now I understand I am very lucky to have my own van. For people who don't have an accessible mode of transportation, they have to rely on public transportation. Public transportation has accessible options, yes. However, these options are extremely rare, and they often have much longer waiting times because there are not a lot of them on the road. Another structural barrier is the lack of accessible communication platforms. This barrier deals with peer support groups that meet virtually. Before I get into it, I have to say, I'm really happy that we even have the option to meet virtually in the first place. None of this would be feasible without virtual platforms. With that being said, I understand virtual platforms are not accessible to everyone. For example, people with visual impairments may need an audio description of what is happening in the meeting. Inversely, people with hearing impairments may need people to write in the chat to be fully involved in the meeting. If nobody in the meeting proactively acknowledges these impairments, the virtual platforms don't have built-in accessibility options for the individual to turn on. There is one more accessibility option I would like to bring up. I cannot read chat because I have my communication device on my chair, and I could not access my computer without someone's assistance. Therefore, I could not open and close the chat independently. Outside of this project, I miss most of the chat messages that come in because of my physical limitations. If the virtual platforms had the option to automatically pop open the chat when messages came in, That would be an awesome accessibility feature. Unfortunately, these features are not available on the vast majority of virtual platforms. These are just a couple structural barriers that limit participation in AAC peer support groups.
Thank you, Michael, for your openness and honesty and for those wonderful comments around structural barriers to organic peer support. I want to read in the chat what Patrick Reagan has said, and he says, and further to Michael's comments about accessible transportation and finding someone to drive his van, in some states, the care providers have to be given special permission to provide services outside of a certain geographical area, which could include going with the person to a city nearby. There are so many challenges to accessible transportation and receiving services during it. Please read out loud if this is after this presentation. Sorry, I just saw the read out loud after the presentation, and that was for Michael. So my apologies, Patrick. I hope that was the timing that you intended. But thank you, Patrick. Our next our next barrier is around social barriers to organic peer supports. And I'm going to hand this over to Lateef McLeod. So Lateef, thrill us with your brilliance. Thank you.
Hi, I am Lateef McLeod, and I also work with the Oregon Health and Science University. For my presentation today, I will be discussing social barriers for AAC peer support. First, I want to point out that the root of these social barriers is ableism, the discrimination and oppression of people with disabilities. This ableism shows up if people who use AAC have families or the people supporting them at their schools who do not see the value of AAC peer support and having people who use AAC mentor each other. These sentiments may come from people not valuing the importance of disability community and how we need to support each other. People with disabilities observe this and may develop internalized ableism and may not want to associate with other people with disabilities as well. This can cause another barrier for AAC peer support. Another social barrier may be due to speechism illustrated by people discriminating against people who are AAC because their mode of communication that deviates from the norm. In these instances, family members, specialists, and other support people might dissuade those who can be helped by using AAC from using the technology and instead encourage oral speech or some other form of normalized communication. These barriers can be combated if we promote more the importance of AAC peer support and also creating spaces for disabled people to be in community with each other, especially for people who use AAC.
Thank you, Lateef, for outlining those barriers. I believe next is organizational barriers. And we have Endeavor Corbin, who will lead us in looking at more in depth into our organizational barriers to organic peer supports.
This is Endeavor talking. Organizational barriers can relate to funding, infrastructure, logistical support, and more. I want to explore how this works by describing an imaginary, though rather prototypical, summer camp for people who need or use AAC as a frame for the organizational barriers to what we have defined as organic peer support. I particularly want to emphasize, along the lines of what Lateef said, that it really does all come down to ableism, speechism specifically, and often intersecting oppressions. This imaginary summer camp may self-describe as offering peer support, but it is probably organized by, directed by, and operated by professionals and caregivers rather than by AAC users. It may also be primarily educational or programmatic in nature, for example, focusing on getting campers to build their AAC skills, or even trying to get campers to approximate non-disabled communication norms. It may be designed specifically for children, with youth-targeted ageism providing extra, quote, justification as to why the involved AC users themselves are supposedly incapable of leading decision-making. And the camp's policies and procedures may operate in a way that prohibits people who neither use AC from spontaneously self-organizing reciprocal peer support amidst the non-organic nature of the setting. For example, older campers may be assigned mentor roles that encourage a model of support that is formal, artificial, one-directional. Or professionals and caregivers present during any given conversation between peers may try to coach the interaction, interfering with the authentic relationship that might otherwise build naturally. These details, as described, do not match our working definition of organic peer support. To be clear, I don't mean that they're all unconscionable or always undesirable or anything like that. Rather, I describe this imaginary camp mostly just because this is what gets resourced. These are the kinds of opportunities that receive funding, infrastructure, logistical support, and other practical resources. And that's presently a barrier to the organic peer support our work group has been discussing with each other and y'all. Of course, there oughtn't be a resource scarcity at all. Folks who do want to access this imaginary summer camp or similar deserve that chance as much as anyone who wants to access organic peer support. However, in our current economic and political systems, resources are indeed artificially made scarce. This leaves all genres of peer support underfunded and undersupported, with a particular burden on organic peer support. Again, it's absolutely ableism operating not so behind the scenes of the way this resource distribution breaks down. Taking apart the characteristics of that summer camp in the context of ableism, professionals, caregivers, and even any given fully speaking person are generally seen as more reliable narrators of the experiences of people who neither use AC than we are ourselves. Meanwhile, we are seen as inherently in need of education or training directed by non-disabled people, regardless of our personal interests or existing skill set. Decision-making power is broadly withheld from disabled folks, especially disabled youth, in terms of both individual autonomy and larger-scale organizing. And our peer interactions are routinely micromanaged by people who do not neither use AAC, with a paternalistic message that they know better than us how we should be supporting each other. The goal of today's presentation isn't to explore solutions or ways of addressing these barriers yet, but I do want to comment briefly on that because I've described not just organizational barriers, but also some ways that oppressions shape those more practical roadblocks. The fact that a lot of this has to do with ableism doesn't mean we just need to go out and change a bunch of minds or open a bunch of hearts and then hope for action to follow. That could take centuries. No, we need the resource reallocations and policy changes to address these organizational barriers in the meantime. That is, we need them now. I hope you listeners will each be part of our continuing conversation about what those solutions look like.
Thank you, Endeavor. Our next, wow, sorry. Our next barrier and our last barrier is on technology barriers, and Linda Akagi is going to be talking to us about that. Linda?
See device accessibility, charging, mounting, and overall access. I need help plugging in my device for charging. And if my device isn't mounted where I can easily reach it, I can't communicate with my friends. Internet access, home internet access, mobile internet access. Reliable internet is essential for everyone these days, but especially for those of us that rely on AAC. Without it, we might not be able to join online communities, connect with loved ones, or access vital information. Computer access for meetings and also organizing calendars and communications. For some of us, using a computer is easier than a phone or tablet. We need access to computers to join video calls, manage our schedules, and stay connected with friends and family. One, AAC device accessibility, charging, mounting, and overall access. I need help plugging in my device for charging. And if my device isn't mounted where I can easily reach it, I can't communicate with my friends. Internet access, home internet access, mobile internet access. Reliable internet is essential for everyone these days, but especially for those of us that rely on AAC. Without it, we might not be able to join online communities, connect with loved ones, or access vital information. Computer access for meetings and also organizing calendars and communications. For some of us, using a computer is easier than a phone or tablet. We need access to computers to join video calls, manage our schedules, and stay connected with friends and family. 1. Caregivers' technology skills and attitudes. Sometimes caregivers don't understand how to use my AAC device or keep it charged. Or they might think I don't need to use technology at all. It's important for caregivers to be supported and learn alongside us. 2. Zoom or web meeting integration with AAC systems. It's hard to participate in online meetings when my AAC device doesn't work well with Zoom or other platforms. Sometimes my messages get cut off or people can't hear me clearly. Better integration would make a big difference. 3. AAC systems sound integration with phone and web meetings. I've been using speech-to-speech technology for a long time. Even back in college, I used it to order pizza. But when I use it in online meetings today, it's still important that a communication assistant can hear me clearly and that my voice is relayed smoothly. One, AAC device accessibility.
Okay. It's just restarting. Take a deep breath in.
Managing Zoom functions during meetings. For instance, juggling the chat, captions, and reactions. It can be overwhelming to keep up with everything going on in a Zoom meeting. Trying to type messages, read captions, and react to what people are saying all at once is a lot to handle. It would be helpful to have tools that make it easier to participate. 2. Sound issues with microphones and feedback. It's frustrating when people can't hear me clearly because of microscope problems or feedback. Sometimes my voice sounds muffled or there's an echo that makes it hard to understand what is being said. 3. Communication timing issues and keeping up with the flow of the conversation. Sometimes it takes me a little longer to get my message across using my AAC device. This can make it hard to jump into the conversation or respond quickly, especially when everyone else is talking fast.
Thank you, Linda. In addition to your resetting of your device during your speech, there's another technology barrier. But thank you for plowing through. We all appreciate it.